right, everybody. Welcome back to the Grow Your Moving Company podcast. I'm your host, Wade Swikle, with two college brothers moving storage and franchising based in sunny Tampa Bay and hot Florida. And today's guest is Wally Pelett. And if you're a member of the Moving Company Owners Unite Facebook group, or you've been to one of our recent Moving Titan retreats, specifically the one out in Arizona that we just got back from a couple of weeks ago, then you know that Wally has spent more than 25 years in the logistics industry and over a decade building one of the Pacific Northwest's premier warehouse, delivery, and operations moving services, but also serving interior designers, furniture stores, home stagers, and 3PLs. But earlier this year, Wally sold that company, which was called toobigformycar.com, through an SBA loan process and now focuses on TB Dispatch Pro, a software platform built specifically for warehouse and delivery operations. Today, we are going to discuss how moving companies can create more stable revenue, land furniture stores and designer accounts, build a business that has a real enterprise value, and ultimately create something that someone wants to buy so that you can exit this fun business that we call the moving industry. And I think everybody out there probably wants to exit at some point, maybe not anytime soon if they're having fun right now, but eventually, as life has it, we all get to a place where maybe our priorities shift or we're ready to move on to the next big and better thing. And it's always good to build your business as if you were going to sell it so that you can at least have that option, or have the option to systematize it to make it run on its own or pass it off to somebody in your family or whatever you want to do with it. I know on my side, I'm not ready to sell. I'm having too much fun right now, but I could see a day coming potentially over the next decade where ready to tackle bigger and better things. And so I'm definitely anxious to hear about that. But Wally, you are an expert when it comes to the warehouse, delivery, interior designer accounts, storage. So I'm curious to kind of learn, what you found with that. But if you don't mind, just in your own words, tell me a little bit about your backstory, how you got involved in the moving industry in the first place, and what brought you here today.
Yeah. Well, I started at 16 years old. Working at McDonald's. I went through their management training program all the way up to, but didn't go to Hamburger University quite. So I spent, those years learning all about process, procedure, efficiency. McDonald's is one of the most efficient, well-run businesses in the world. Their management training is world class. So my next job was in the delivery business with a next day ground company that competed with UPS. So this is back before FedEx or DHL or Amazon was involved in any of that. I worked with that company for 4 years, started as a driver, became a supervisor, then eventually managed the hiring and training and HR. That company was sold to a regional carrier that was trying to build a national competitor for UPS. It went horribly wrong. So the sales manager and I left and started a next day ground service, again, competing with UPS back before that was even a thing. We built that up to about $3 million a year. Competition was crazy in that industry. It was a big race to zero. You would only get accounts if you were the least expensive choice. So we ended up selling that to a competitor. Along the way, we started a courier business. So the on-demand work for pharmacies and labs and medical supplies and all of that. But again, we sold that business, had to go to work for that company for 2 years as part of that deal. During that 2 years, the thing I missed the most was being able to call my office, and I'm at Costco or Home Depot and I'm trying to buy something that's too big to fit in my car. I would just call the office and they would send a truck and I'd get my stuff home. So when I didn't have that anymore, I missed it. It came up about 6 times in 2 years where I could have used that and didn't have it. So ended up leaving that company and starting toobigformycar.com, where originally we just provided delivery service to furniture stores. We didn't have a warehouse. It was just picking up and delivering from stores. It wasn't for a few years, probably 3 years, before we started getting into requests from interior designers to pick up furniture from their receiver and deliver it to their clients because their receiver was, 2 or 3 weeks out, and we would do the delivery, tomorrow, the next day, whenever the designer wanted that done. So that's how we kind of got started in the designer side of the business. But we had built the delivery side up to about $1 million a year before we ever got a warehouse and started working with designers.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear about that because, early on in the early years where we were just trying to find any work, we happened to stumble upon a few delivery accounts. We did stuff with this company called, I think it was called like Installs. It was like a third party service that like Sam's Club, Walmart, some of those big box retailers utilized. We worked with Big Lots, and they would call us when people would buy furniture from that store. American Freight, they were more budget friendly delivery venues. We had tried to land, some higher end places, but most of them seemed to kind of handle it on their own, and it kept us busy. We also used to do some receiving and delivery for an online mattress company called Satva, where we'd receive large shipments of mattresses periodically, and then we'd deliver those on routes a few days a week. And that actually kind of got relatively big. But one of the things that I realized is that the margins just were not very strong. I mean, all these places would pay anywhere from 50 to maybe $120 a delivery for each item. And most of the deliveries were taking at least an hour to do. But a lot of times when you factored in the routes and stuff, sometimes they would take 2 or 3 hours if they were going farther away. And it was ultimately coming out to be less than what our hourly rates were. And we found that, paying guys on a piece rate basis magically got them to deliver things a lot faster than paying them on an hourly rate basis. So we worked with it for a while, but ultimately, the tickets were not big enough for the manpower and the resources that most of them required when you factored in fuel, the wear and tear on a truck, tying up the truck from a more profitable move. The guys, obviously needed to get paid to do it. And then the receiving part for some of the accounts that we had where we'd take the orders, they'd just show up at any given time, and we didn't have the best loading dock and warehouse set up at that point in time. So, we'd have to basically stop what we were doing and unload a semi truck full of mattresses randomly in the middle of the day and then hold that stuff for a while. And it got to be a lot. And for the margins that we were turning on it, and, maybe our setup wasn't the best, but we decided to kind of pull away from most of those delivery accounts and focus more on the moving side. But, for a company that is starting out, or it's the slow season that needs work or anything like that, I mean, it definitely keeps you guys busy and keeps your truck driving around town. But I'm curious, like, how you had it set up and what you did to build that up to where it was profitable and sustainable and made sense to continue to do.
Yeah. So your story is almost the exact same story that I've heard from a ton of different companies in the moving space, right? They get involved with a 3PL or a national account like Home Depot or Lowe's or the mattresses and whatnot. And the problem is all those national accounts want to pay $50, $70, $80 per delivery. And when you start with that kind of business, the margins are not great and the work is not great. And eventually you just don't see the value like you do with a moving job, or the revenue that a moving truck can make in a day versus what you're going to make with that work on the delivery side with the national accounts. And so we were fortunate enough, I guess, to get into the furniture delivery business not knowing anything. I mean, I knew about logistics and delivery and technology and, how to get from point A to point B with whatever we're taking to the customer. But I had no idea about national accounts and that kind of work. So we started with local stores, just walking into stores, talking to them about the deliveries and their needs. And the revenue with the local stores is probably 40, 50% higher than what you'd find with those national accounts. And so we had a pretty good base of business with the local stores. We were probably doing 1,000 deliveries a month, maybe, before we ever started working with a national account. And then those $80, $90, $100 orders fit in much better with what we had. A lot easier to just throw in the $100 order when we're already in that zip code on that day. So it actually helped increase the efficiency of the routes. We were able to reduce miles, add more deliveries to each truck, and the revenue per day actually went up. But if you start with that kind of work, it is really hard to make it work, and it's hard to get motivated to build that kind of business when the margins are that low and the rates are that low. And you see the moving truck doing twice as much revenue as compared to the delivery truck. So it just doesn't make sense. And then they get disinterested and that side of the business just goes away. But again, if you start with a good base of local accounts that are paying 30, 40% more, and the interior designers are paying even more than that, then when you start that national account work at the lower rates, it just seems to be a better fit and can actually increase the efficiency of those routes. But the one thing you'll find with the delivery side is that day in, day out, the revenue per truck is going to be lower than the revenue per truck for moves, especially during the peak, right? Those trucks can generate, $2,000, $3,000 a day. Now on the delivery side, we have trucks that generate $2,000 or $3,000 a day, but that's pretty far and few between. But it's just more consistent. Like it's easier to get a truck doing $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 a day, 6 days a week, all year, right? We just don't have the big drop off during the winter. Now there are, peaks and valleys a little bit, but it's 10, 15%, not 30 or 40%. It's a little bit easier to manage that, but it's just more consistent work. So the revenue per truck per day might be a little lower, but it's consistent and it's there.
That's interesting. You get the predictability. You can, for a staffing and scheduling, standpoint, I can see how that could be of value. And $1,200, $1,300 is a truck a day is, if you're getting consistent revenue from an account, that's like almost guaranteed predictable work with that. I can see that making sense to carry you through those slower times of the year. What were the gross margins on those accounts? Like, with move, if I have a $1,200 or $1,300, $1,400 move, I mean, we can get 55, sometimes 60% gross profit on those jobs. What are you seeing with running deliveries?
Yeah, on the delivery side, it should be pretty similar to that. The 50% plus should be the gross. Now, the thing you have to consider with the delivery side is that I'm not paying commissions to sales folks on top of that. I'm not paying for ads or marketing or mail. So when you add that back in, the gross margin's pretty good.
Wow, that's a very good point. Yeah, that makes sense. And then I would imagine you probably don't need as much training or as high of a paid caliber of crew for those. I mean, maybe your driver, but your helper probably doesn't need to be making, as much as what a helper on a moving job needs to make to have the same caliber. Am I right or wrong?
I think it's a lot like the moving side. You're going to have your lead guys that are going to make more money. You'll have the helpers that'll make a little less, but I think it's pretty comparable. The part where it changes is the teams you'll use for the interior designer side. Those guys have to be top level and probably make a little bit more, but you're going to be able to charge that designer a little bit more as well. And there's a difference between the guys we'll send on regular furniture store deliveries versus who will send on an install for a designer, right? They're two they all have the same training, same process, the same procedures, but the furniture delivery guys are just wired to go, go, go. The interior designers need you to slow down a bit and to be available to, move things here and there. They may not tell you things that they needed you to do on site, and you don't find out till you get there that they need you to move the current furniture to the garage, and then you got to move the dining set to place the rug, and they forget to tell you that kind of stuff. So it slows down your day. And if the team isn't, trained and wired to be able to slow down and provide that higher level of service to the designers will lose their mind.
Hey movers, it's Wade Swikle, and you're listening to the Grow Your Moving Company podcast. If you've ever wasted money on marketing to the wrong homes, listen up. This is why I use USA Home Listings. They're the only platform in the moving industry built by movers that not only has new home listings and under contract listings updated daily, but now offers enhanced data that can eliminate vacant homes and give you phone numbers and emails for both homeowners and realtors, giving you multiple ways to connect and close more jobs. Their vacancy AI tool removes empty homes so there are no more wasted mailing efforts, and their Tier 2 data takes it further, providing highly accurate contact details for both homeowners and realtors for email, phone, and social outreach. The result? Higher conversions, stronger ROI, and more book jobs with less spend. Check out usahomolistings.com because it's where real movers get real leads.
Yeah. So we kind of got to the point where we would have almost separate teams to do the designer side.
That makes total sense. And designers, I like working with designers, especially the ones that play by our rules and allow us to systematize it. Those are the fun ones, and they're relatively easy because typically, and we can get into designers, but I still have some questions on the delivery piece of it. But typically, those are going to be higher end clients that are willing to pay more. With the furniture delivery side, a lot of what we used to see is we used to have to haul away a lot of old things, and sometimes we'd be able to collect extra fees from that because there's a cost to dispose of that. But sometimes it was really good stuff. I mean, for a long time, I slept on a mattress that we had hauled away from a moving job that was in perfectly good shape. It was a return that had been slept on for 2 or 3 nights, and it's more expensive to ship it back to the mattress company than they usually just tell you to get rid of it. Yeah. So there's some benefits there for sure. But I'm curious, like what you were charging. Were you charging by the piece? Were you charging just for the pickup and delivery? Did it depend? Like, was there like brackets? Like, just how was the charge structure set up with the deliveries?
Yeah. So when we first started doing deliveries for furniture stores, again, I knew nothing. And so I let them kind of lead the way with how they wanted to see rates or how they thought they wanted to see rates. And we had all kinds of different rate structures we came up with in the first year. Some of it was, by miles and, the first 3 pieces included, and then a rate per mile. But then what you find out is that, number one, you have to look up the miles to calculate the rate. So they go into Google Maps, they type in the address, Google gives you 3 different routes, they pick the one that's the lowest, and then that's the rate. Problem is that that's a manual process. So what we ended up landing on, toward the end of our first year was we would give them a base rate that included X number of pieces, and we would do that base rate by the zip code, because that's almost the exact same thing as doing it by the miles, right? We know how many miles it is from that store to that zip code. And so then we could change that based on the store, based on the volume that they gave us. Some stores would get 3 pieces included in their base rate. Some would get 5. Then we would charge additional for assembly of beds and dining tables and desks and such. The thing we started doing very early on, what we found out was that if we didn't have the conversation about removals at the time we were scheduling the delivery, it led to a lot of customers assuming that we were also going to haul away their old sofa when we were delivering the new one, or, hey, the sales guy said you guys would haul this away. When what the sales guy said was, you can arrange that with them for an additional fee or whatever. So we just started building that into the scheduling process. And what we found out was that most customers were willing to pay more for the haul away of their old furniture than they paid for the delivery of the new. So we might deliver the new for $130 and they'll pay us $189 to haul away the old. And they'll do it because it's less expensive than calling 1-800-GOT-JUNK, and it's more efficient. We're going to do it at the exact same time we're bringing you the new pieces. So there's no arranging 1-800-GOT-JUNK to come get it on Tuesday. We deliver on Wednesday. So now for a full day, you don't have anything to sit on. So that's what we found. And building it into the scheduling process, communicated to the customer that this is not included with the delivery side. So
that makes sense.
It was a great source. I mean, it increased our revenue per order by $12 across all orders, just being able to offer that. And it's a high margin service because it didn't cost that much to actually dispose of those pieces. And we're already there. So it didn't add much labor.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And the mileage charge, I could see that being a double-edged sword because, on the one hand, you're quoting it out on a pretty static, understandable rate, but on the other hand, not every road mile is created equally. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're driving in a
Oh,
heavily
God, yeah.
trafficked area and you got guys sitting in rush hour traffic or, big city traffic, and they could be sitting, I mean, it could take them an hour to go 10 miles in some situations. And then, if you're on a backcountry road, you could probably, fly through that. So I could see that being somewhat of a challenge. And that was one of the challenges we ran into as well. They had us delivering all over North Central Florida. Sometimes we were going an hour and a half away, 2 hours away in some cases. And going back to what the sales guy was saying, most of those furniture sales guys work on commission, and they're going to say what they need to say to get the sale. And then what happens after that is not their problem. And so we had situations where we'd get calls at 7 o'clock at night and being like, "Hey, I need you here 2 hours ago. I promised the customer that they'd have their stuff delivered at 5. And I forgot to tell you guys." And so now we're scrambling, like me personally, my GM,
Right.
we're jumping in the truck. We're driving an hour and a half away in the pouring rain. It's dark out now. We were already doing some deliveries. We got $1,000 cash, and we're in some sketchy part of town going into somebody's house that we don't know who this person is to set up their stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not like a move where there's a little bit more of a vetting process, or at least a price barrier to get people in. I mean, some of these furniture accounts were for lower, cheaper furniture, and people would get their tax return money. That was the funny part. Like during tax return season, people just went out and bought a bunch of furniture, and that was like the busiest time for at least like American Freight, and they all paid cash. And a lot of times it was not in the best part of town, and it's nighttime, and it's, whatever. So it was interesting, but yeah, zip code, I could see that being a good way to do it. I think largely depends on your market too. I mean, a zip code in Texas could be a lot more spread out than a zip code in a densely populated metro.
Yeah.
So,
but
that's a factor.
So the thing to do with that is that when you're looking up those zips, you can see the size of them. And so if Google Maps says it's 15 miles to that zip, but you see that zip code actually extends out another 8, we would just bump up the miles and base it off of that. So we were actually basing our base rate off of kind of the highest mileage for that zip code, not the downtown. So we were able to kind of factor that in, because you're right, there are some zip codes that are just ginormous.
Yeah.
And so you just kind of have to assume that's where you're going.
Yeah. And as far as scheduling, that was part of the challenge we had too, because a lot of these furniture stores, they didn't have, a full route for us. It was like, you got one delivery today, you might have 2 tomorrow, maybe then 3 days later, you get a call and you need something done. And, maybe we were just working with the wrong places, but a lot of these places wanted it done ASAP, that day, or, like I said, 2 hours ago, when by the time they called you and told you about it, because they got an angry call from their customer because they promised them something that couldn't be done. And I know anytime I bought furniture and had it delivered, it's usually like, at least a few days out. And so that makes sense if you're working with a high volume distributor. And they can give you, a relatively predictable route that's going to be several deliveries to make it worthwhile, and you have enough time to schedule guys and get them in to go do it. But the ones we were working with, they tended to be a lot more one-off situations that wanted it done ASAP, and that part was really challenging. How did you? What boundaries did you set in terms of getting the routes, or were you working with more high volume places that gave you a guaranteed route every day?
No, not to start. To start, we had to convince furniture stores that they even needed us at all, because you're never going to walk into a furniture store and they're going to be like, "Thank God you're here." Right? We have all of the stuff we just sold yesterday and I have no way to get it to the customer. I mean, that's not a thing. And so what we learned was we had to teach them ways that they needed us. And so my background in the next day ground and the same day business, I started the furniture business thinking that all the deliveries were going to have to be on the nights and the weekend. And we were offering service in 3 hours or less, like a courier would. And then we learned real quick that same day delivery is pretty rare. A lot of times the store has to bring the pieces down from a distribution center, or they order them and it takes 6 weeks. Same day was pretty much reserved for they were selling something off the floor. But that's how we started, was just offering on demand, and we would teach the store to stop saying no to their customer. If your truck is full on Tuesday, you don't tell the customer no, you give it to us. If your third party is full on Friday, customer wants Friday, you don't tell them no, you give it to us. So that's how we got our foot in the door. And then as we grew and had more volume, and we were doing set runs to parts of the state that were 2 and 3 hours away, but we were doing them on a schedule so the rates could be more efficient. And then we could use that as a way to encourage stores to use us for that work, because we were one of the only companies in town that they had access to that had set runs that would cover, the coast and Bend and the different parts of the state. But on a long enough timeline, what we found was that when the answer was always yes for us, and they could stop telling customers no, I mean, it didn't matter if their truck broke down, they don't reschedule those orders, they call us and we find a way. But on a long enough timeline, what we found was the business all would come to us, whether they were running their own trucks. Eventually, they would get tired of the maintenance and the breakdowns and the hiring and the turnover and the training. And we had been a reliable resource for the last year. They would move it all to us. And if they were using a third party, that was actually a quicker process to get all the work if they were using a third party, because they get used to our communication, our technology, our professionalism, how quick a delivery can get scheduled in our system versus their third party. Their third party doesn't have any technology, which leads to a bunch of phone calls to the store saying, hey, nobody called me to schedule my delivery, or they're late, or I don't know what 3-hour window they're going to show up in. So it was easier to get them to switch from a third party to us versus their own truck to us. But again, on a long enough timeline, we always found that they would make that switch. So it's not as quick a process as you might like, but like, we didn't care if we were picking up 5 orders a week, 10 orders a week, 15 orders a week from a store. We would take whatever they have and we would build it into our schedule. So we cover certain zip codes on certain days of the week to increase the efficiency, to keep your rates low. But we're also not in the business of telling you no. So if you do want something, same day, the next day, a day where we don't cover that zip code, the answer is yes at this price. And then what you find is half of the time the customer's like, I'll take the Wednesday where you're normally in that area for the lower price. Half the time they're like, yep, no problem. I'll pay the additional cost, but I got to have it on this day. So, we just teach them that we're not in the business of saying no. We're in the business of telling you how much that's going to cost.
That makes sense. I love that. I hate turning away business. That is one thing that drives me nuts. If we're having a busy end of the month or whatever it is, that when capacity is tapped, it's not, can I do this? It's how can I do this? And I try to approach a lot of things in life that way. Sometimes I get myself into trouble with it, but for the most part, it's worked out. And that was going to be my next question, is how you were getting your foot in the door, because a lot of these places, I mean, we had a few fall into our lap back in the day, but a lot of these places, they have their own delivery. If it's a mom and pop store, if it's a nationwide store, like Ashley Furniture or Home Depot or, one of the other ones, like a lot of times, they've got some corporate arrangement with the third party deal. And so, was there like an avatar of a store that you found the most success walking into, that were your best accounts, that were willing to play by your rules and, pay your prices and allow you to get going? I mean, you answered some of those questions with, starting off with the stuff nobody else wanted to do to get your foot in the door. But I'm curious, as you started to really dial in on this line of work, what was the ideal place to get into? And then what would you do to get established with that?
Yeah. So, the ideal profile for a store is tricky, because there are stores that are 3,000 square feet that you would, if you were just driving by, you'd think, yeah, that's 3 deliveries a week. I'm not going to bother with that. I want to find a store that's got 10 or 15 or however many. But what we found is sometimes those 3,000 square foot stores, one example was a 3,000 square foot store, but what they sold was custom sofas, right? The upholstery. So not only did they need delivery, but they needed a warehouse to receive it and store it until it was delivered to the customer. But a 3,000 square foot sofa store was selling 50 to 75 customers a month. So that was great business because they would ship it to us. So we'd get paid for the receiving. If they needed inspection, we would get paid for that. We get paid for storage, and we would get a decent rate on the delivery. But the great thing was it was coming out of our building. So that was way more efficient than driving to them and picking up one or two or three orders. So the ideal, account is tough because it can be deceiving when they can sell that much volume out of a small space. What I like to look at is kind of their price ranges. When you walk into a store, you can start looking at what they're selling a sofa for, what do they sell a dining set for. And when that sofa is selling for $600, that's a much different customer than if that sofa is selling for $3,000, $4,000 plus. So that kind of gives you an idea of where their customer is going to be with, rates and what they're going to be willing to pay for things. But on average, it all kind of works itself out. You'll end up with a mix of stores that are kind of on the lower end, stores that are on the higher end, and at different volume with your overall business. Either end can work great. And especially the higher volume you get, the more that lower end can make sense. In fact, we started finding ways to get the lower end customer to pay more. We would offer different rate structures to where their more price conscious customer could have a lower rate, but that was on certain days of the week. And then other customers could pay more for whatever day that they wanted. So we'd have a cheaper rate on Tuesday and Thursday, which were our slower days. And then we'd have higher rates for, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. But those customers could pick. I can save some money and have it done on Tuesday or Thursday, or I can pay, a little more and have it done on whatever day I want. But we put them in a position to pick their own rate. And so that's allowed us kind of to win, more business on the lower end. But then what we found out was that, a high percentage of their customers were willing to pay more. It was just a mental block with the store, thinking that their customers don't want to pay that much. And that is true for, a percentage of their customers, but we offered that percentage a choice. But the rest of them were willing to pay a little more. So on average, their rate was about where we wanted it in the first place.
Makes total sense. Hey everybody, Wade here, and I've got an awesome game-changing announcement for you. Now, I know a lot of you guys are constantly asking, how do we get more leads? How do we get better leads? You're tired of spending way too much money for pay-per-click or buying leads or LSA, whatever it may be, only to get low-paying customers that become a headache with small moves, and you don't get an ROI on those jobs. Well, the exciting news is that our friends at Moversville have just launched a new product called the Realtor Referral Engine, where they not only get in front of realtors, but they command direct response, replies, and referred business. I'm super pumped about this, but don't just take my word for it. My friend Austin Yarborough over at Central Coast Moving and Lucky Day Moving and the Moving Army, I know he's got a bunch of them, just like me. That's why we're friends. Has gotten over 40 direct replies from realtors in his first month of using the Realtor Referral Engine from Moversville. And then there's Scott with ABC Moving Systems. He's booked over $30,000 in work and made over 20 new realtor connections. What can an extra $30,000 a month do for your business? Here's what makes this kind of marketing different. These aren't just one and done jobs. These are realtors who keep referring large jobs, can introduce you to the other members of their brokerage, and then those moves can start referring more and more jobs. You have to stay front of mind though. So if you want to learn more about the Realtor Referral Engine by Moversville, head on over to moversville.com and book a quick 15-minute call with my friend Tim, who runs the place. He'll know exactly what your business needs to get set up. He can do it all to make sure that you're getting high ticket jobs at a fraction of the cost of other marketing sources. I think you're going to be happy that you did that. Don't sleep on this one. Go check out moversville.com. Look for the 15-minute intro call with Tim and report back with your results so that I can talk about them here on the show. Thanks for tuning in. Did you have more success working with the independent, whether mom and pop or maybe even a larger independent established stores, or did you get in with any of these massive, nationwide or international corporate stores like your Home Depots?
No, our first 3 years were probably all local furniture stores with one location, sometimes two, sometimes three locations in our area. I think in year three, we got our first furniture store that had 40 locations across the country. I think they had four or five up in the Seattle area and three down in our area, and then a bunch in California, and then spread out through some other states. But that was our first national account in year three, I think.
Yeah, that's what I've found walking into various, more established corporate stores is it's usually not the people that are making that decision usually aren't working on the floor, and
No.
it's harder to get to the gatekeeper and figure out, and they've got a solution figured out with somebody else at the time, and it's few and far between. But I mean, is that basically what you were doing with these smaller stores? Is just walking in and talking to a
Yeah.
manager and just
Yeah.
giving them some information and seeing if they had time to talk with you and hear you out?
Yeah. You didn't even have to talk to the owner. What we found was that a salesperson could refer their customers to you even outside of their regular flow. If they ran their own truck or they were using a third party, a salesperson could just refer that customer to you if they wanted to. So we didn't have, a lengthy sales process or approval process, or I got to talk to I mean, sometimes you do get that, I have to talk to the owner or you need to talk to the owner, but sometimes the salesperson's just like, yeah, I see the value in having you as a resource for my customers and I'm going to refer them. So I liked that about the process. And especially if you go in and you look like them, right? Like I would dress in a dress shirt and a jacket, even if I had jeans on, but I would look like them. And so it's just kind of easier to build rapport and a relationship. And you get a lot of times, at least with people we were competing with, it being a guy in a t-shirt and his dirty jeans and, no process, no procedure, no technology. And, those are the people that I want to compete with. If you're using paper and a fax machine, we're going to kill you.
Mm.
And today, even, I see a lot of receivers, working with designers and stuff, and they're using Google Docs and shared spreadsheets and manual processes. And, that's today's fax machine, right? It's
Yeah.
no different. I like to compete with that.
Absolutely. And I'd love to kind of switch over to the designer side of it because that has been a great line of work that we've discovered and we were limited in our previous space with what we could do because we just didn't have a huge storage operation that would justify a full-time warehouse manager that would be, inspecting every single piece that came in and documenting it and updating the designers. So we kind of, we set it up to where, if they'll play by our rules and we don't have to open it up when it comes in on a receiving order. And we just kind of do a soft inspect around the box, make sure the box looks like it's in good shape and they're okay with that. Then we would take on some of those clients. So we were a little bit limited there because most of the designers, especially the higher end ones, they want to make sure, if they're ordering a $3,000 piece of furniture that it's showing up from the factory and it's going to be showing up ultimately to their client's house in good shape. And I know some companies, we toured Derek's plush operation over there in Arizona. That he has an entire separate company dedicated to those real high
Yeah.
end ones where they're unboxing everything, opening it up, and making sure that there is not a single hair on that furniture, and then repackaging it and putting it away. And we had started to do a little bit of that up in Gainesville back in the day, but we were not prepared for it, and it didn't work out very well. But I think we're back at a place where it definitely makes more sense. And I'd love to grow that side of the business because you get the receiving fee, you get the inspection fee, you get the storage fee, and then you get the delivery fee and then the haulaway fee of any debris or other furniture after you've done the move out to deliver it. And it's really good money because these people aren't really worried about the money side of it. Of course, everybody wants a value, they want a good deal, but at the same time, they're willing to pay for that premium service with, that white glove touch. What were you doing to land more of those receiving and designer accounts?
Sure. So on the receiving and the inspection and how it can kind of be a burden on a moving company when you first get started, that's a fact. I mean, when we first got our warehouse, we didn't hire people for the warehouse specifically because our volume with that type of work was really low. So we would pull people from the office when a truck arrived, and they would go out and do the receiving, and then we would get a few inspections and send somebody out from the office to do those. But we were committed to building that side of the business, so that period of time where you didn't have a dedicated person out in the warehouse wasn't very, very long. But if you stay in that kind of messy beginning stage for too long, you won't want to continue doing that type of work. So if you're going to do it, you got to get out there and start building that type of work so that the volume is high enough to where it's more efficient and it can kind of warrant having a dedicated person out in the warehouse. But for us, we started with companies calling us because their third-party receiver couldn't do the delivery when they wanted it done. And then from there, they started asking when we were going to get a warehouse. We got a warehouse. But from there, it starts with referrals from, your first few interior design clients. They all know each other. They all talk to each other. You can get them to refer, their contacts to you. And I would even set up a program where if they're referring other designers to you, that they have the ability to tell them, hey, I can get you a discount, right? So we would set up a structure for referrals to where they would have a rate structure, and the designer could tell them that it's a discount, even if it wasn't really a discount. It was a rate structure we had set up for a referral program. But beyond referrals from interior designers, you can join the local interior design associations. You can go to those meetings. You can get to a point where they'll use you as a resource for walkthroughs of a warehouse and educating designers on what they should be looking for in a third party to do their receiving and storage and inspections and all of that. So you can be a resource for the interior design associations. In this day and age with social media, Facebook, Instagram, super easy to find the interior designers. They're all posting on the social, so you can engage with them, not only with your personal account, but your business account. Not only following them, but liking their posts, engaging with their posts. That seems to be a good way to meet the designers. In fact, I had one 2 weeks ago. I had already sold my business, but I'm looking at a post on Instagram, and it's a designer in Delaware. She's from Portland, but she's at a project in Delaware. She's talking about some issue with some pieces didn't show up as they were supposed to. And I liked her post. I started following her, but I also tried to help her. I hooked her up with one of our software customers out in that state, and he couldn't help her, but he knew somebody that could. So, through that post, we helped her solve whatever problem she had out in Delaware. And 2 weeks later, she's a customer for us now. So,
wow.
Just through social media, just being helpful and engaging.
Wow, that's awesome. And you can do that with realtors. You follow their stuff and you're
it's the same thing.
Everybody knows that you don't get a lot of organic engagement from, just general posts. Right. As moving company owners, like we post, all this great stuff, and you're lucky if you get 7 likes on it. But realtors, there's 10,000 realtors in my market, and they're all posting, their new listings and their, whatever tips. Some of them get creative and they do the history of the area or whatever, which are actually, value posts. But but I found just if you follow them, they see that, you follow, your company followed them, maybe you as the owner followed them, you like and you comment and you reshare and you put it on your story, you message them when they've got something good, slide in their DMs.
Yeah. And they see it every single time. Those people, they look at it and they're looking at the names.
Because you're one of the few people doing it most of the time. So that's a great way to do it. I want to take a second and tell you all about Tighten Up Training. As a co-founder, we've spent months and months and months and a lot of money pooling together resources from some of the best moving companies in the world. And we're excited to bring this to an online platform available to any mover to use at an affordable price. Tighten Up Training has over 200 videos including mover training, your highest turnover position, so that you can reduce claims, streamline operations, give your team the tools to perform at the highest level of service that generate repeat and referral business and allow you to charge higher prices, as well as sales training, marketing training, business development, leadership. We're adding more content as we speak. We've got legal training in there. We've even got door-to-door training for the moving industry, thanks to Lenny Gray at the Moving Titan Retreat. We've seen a massive explosion of moving companies jumping on to Tighten Up training since the last retreat, and people are loving it. And when you sign up and mention this podcast, we're going to give you a free 6-week onboarding course in order to learn how to hold your team accountable and get the entire team on the platform so that you can have the best off-season and summer season that you've ever had. So go to tightenuptraining.com, schedule your free demo today, and look forward to tightening up. How did you get your first designer account, for anybody who's, starting off with it or just maybe trying to drum up some new ones that, because
the first designer, the first designer account in my experience and talking to the movers and such, it's always, they call you. Because there's a kind of limited number of high quality receivers. And that seems to be a problem across the country, because I hear it all the time that designers are reaching out to moving companies for this service, for the receiving, the inspection, the storage, the installation. And why are they doing that? Because they either can't find a receiver in that market, or they've been burned by whatever receiver they have used. So much harder to find a high quality receiver than it is to find a high quality mover. And so you will get just organic, folks calling you for it. And again, our start was them calling us to do a delivery, picking up from their receiver. So that's how we got started. But I see a lot of moving companies who do get calls. They either just don't know how to engage it. They don't know how to rate it. They don't know how to provide the service without screwing it up. Or they do have one or two small accounts and they are kind of working their way through it, and they just don't know how to take the next step and, really grow that side of that business. But once you have one or two, that's where it starts.
Yeah, the referrals come, and a lot of these designers work out of their home, or they have a little boutique shop. They don't have a big warehouse. It's too much overhead. A lot of them are just solo operators. It's a lot of time an affluent housewife, or sometimes they get into it other ways, but it's or maybe it's a side hustle for them or whatever. But they tend to not. They don't want to be working in a warehouse. Like, that's not the business that they're signing up for. Like, they're signing up to go into multi-million-dollar homes that people have custom built and then pick out the pieces that fit that specific home. And what I found, a lot of very affluent people, a lot of times, a lot of them do move furniture from one nice home to another nice home, but a lot of times they're buying custom furniture specifically for that home. And that's where the designer comes in. And so when you can, provide that, there's not very many services that only do receiving for designers. I mean, every now and then you hear of one of them. I think there used to be one or two of them in Tampa. I don't know if there's any specific receiving for designer specific companies here in our market anymore. I think the one that I knew of went out of business. There's just too much overhead. Maybe they weren't great. I don't know. I don't know much about them, but that's how we got one of our first designers. Is their previous one that they were working with went out of business. And if you can make sure that they are aware, because I mean, most moving companies, at least in Tampa, don't even really have a good warehouse or a good loading dock or receiving space. A lot of moving companies also operate out of their home or a truck yard or a small office that they can find some truck parking at or whatever. I mean, once you do the math and you look at your market, I think here there's probably less than 10% of moving companies. I think there's over 200 moving companies, including a lot of the road guys that aren't necessarily, legitimate established companies, but there's probably, probably got to be less than 20 that actually have the setup with a warehouse and a dock to be able to do this stuff. So you're automatically kind of in a new category when you have that stuff. And that's an area that I'm really looking to get into a lot more now that we have more capability. Did you find that most of the designers that you did receiving for, did they want a hard inspect where you opened up everything and you surveyed it and took pictures and sent it back if it was damaged, or reported it to them at least if it was pre-existing damage from the factory shipping? Or were you able to land a lot of the easy low-hanging accounts that just, they didn't necessarily require all of that, they just needed somewhere to receive their stuff, and they took their own chances on making sure that it came all in one piece? What was like the percentage that you saw between the two of those? Because one's a lot more involved, where you kind of need to have that dedicated
Yeah.
line, where the other is kind of more passive, that, if you've got a dock and enough warehouse space, you get into it without a full-time dedicated person overseeing it.
Yeah, so initially with the designers, it was all they needed: receiving, inspection, the pictures, the whole 9 yards. And eventually you'd run into designers that didn't want to pay for the inspection part. They just wanted the receiving. And what we found out real quick is that if an interior designer doesn't have those pieces inspected and you find a problem with that piece 6 days, 10 days, a month down the road, they have no recourse with the manufacturer, and they have no recourse with the shipper. They have 3 business days to inspect those pieces and report a problem. Outside of that, there is no claim. And so if a designer doesn't pay you to do the inspection, and then there's a problem a week later, 2 weeks later, the only recourse they have is with you, right? They want to try to come to you and say, hey, manufacturer says that thing was perfect when it left. Now it's been with you for 3 weeks and it's damaged. You must have done it. So how do I file a claim? And the answer is, you don't, because you didn't pay for the inspection. So we actually got to the point where with designers, we didn't offer a service that didn't include the inspection. It was just too much trouble. And they need it. If they want to protect themselves, they got to have that inspection. So we stopped allowing that. Now, when working with furniture stores, that was a little different. If they were going to ship to us, we would do the receiving for just a receiving fee, and we would not open and inspect. But that was because the furniture store buys enough from their manufacturers that manufacturer will help them a month later, or if there is concealed damage in the box, right? So for those stores, we're happy to just do the receiving and not do a full open and inspect. So
That makes sense.
It's just kind of knowing the customer base and what they have access to and what they don't. So for the designers, they got to have it done within three days, or there's going to be a problem.
That makes total sense. And now, let's see, I had a question that just slipped out of my head. Oh, yeah. Leading into that, how you structured the fees for the designers. I'm assuming you had a receiving fee and or inspection fee. Maybe those were 2 separate fees, and then a storage fee, because a lot of times somebody's building a house, they're ordering this stuff over the course of several months. It's coming in until it all gets there, and then you would deliver it. So you could charge for the storage on it, and then a delivery fee, which for us, we just charge our hourly rate to send our guys out to deliver it and set it up. And then, maybe something for any kind of haul away of if there's debris or anything like that generated. But like, how did you structure each stage of that? Or did you have some kind of package that you offered?
Yeah. So at first we just, for the designers, we had a receiving fee, which included the inspection. But eventually we split that out into a separate receiving fee, a separate inspection fee, because then we could handle those store accounts that didn't need the inspection. So we broke that up into 2 fees, and we kind of base it on a time, right? Because what we're selling out there in the warehouse is the time, right? We're not selling a product or, a piece or something. We're just selling time. And when you're selling time, we have to make at least a 50% margin, if not higher. And I would start at 50, and as efficiency increased, you can get to 60 plus. But initially, you still want to be at least a 50 margin. So we would look at how long things take. I mean, we'd time it. How long does it take? The truck backs up. The driver has to engage your guy. They give you the paperwork for the shipment. You have to check off the paperwork and sign it and make a PDF copy to email to the designer. You got to pull the piece off the truck. You have to get it into your spreadsheet or your software. You have to label the piece. You have to then open it, fully inspect it, photograph it from 52 ways, rewrap it, protect it for storage, put it in storage. How long does all that take? Right. And for, one sofa, that could take 45 minutes, right? To really do the whole thing from start to finish. Could take more. And then you look at what labor costs you all in: unemployment, workers' comp, social security, any benefits that you're paying above and beyond that. And then you have to make margin. So if for easy math, your all in cost per hour is 30 and it took an hour, right? You got to charge at least $60 to $70 if you are going to make money doing this. And that's why we're doing it, to make money. So that's kind of how we looked at the rate structures. And we would just look at the different time it takes for a sofa or an end table or a coffee table or a dining table or a lamp or, a box of accessories or whatever it was. And we would just build out our rate structure based on how long those things took, which also then gives the designer a known quantity, right? Like, we're not trying to tell them we're going to charge you by the hour for receiving, which I see some companies trying to do. The problem with that is that the designer can't build that into a quote. Like, they can't have a list of pieces that they're going to purchase for a project and figure out what the receiving and inspection fees are going to be, because they don't know how many hours that takes. So that's another reason to have, kind of a fixed structure for the receiving and for the inspection, because the designer can calculate that. They know if they buy these 8 pieces, they can calculate what the receiving and inspection fees are going to be. We also charged for storage in the same way. A sofa would have its own rate, an end table, a coffee table, a lamp would have a rate per day. And again, the designer can calculate that. If they think the pieces are going to be in storage for a month, they can multiply the storage rate per day by 30 and estimate what that's going to be, which also then keeps them from, sending us giant lists of pieces that they're purchasing and asking us to put together a quote, right? Because they have the rates. They generally don't need us to do that, which saves us time and makes our side more efficient. So that's how we kind of came up with the different rate structures. But then we also create a rate structure that is our highest rates, right? So the smallest account is going to pay the highest rates. And then based on volume for different accounts, we could discount off of those rates, which made it easy not to have to customize rates by account. But for example, a one-off designer who, sends you one small project every 6 months, to receive and inspect a sofa, they might pay $15 for receiving that sofa, another $65 to inspect that sofa, and they might pay $1.25 a day to store it. A bigger account that is using you consistently, if they're giving us, $2,000, $3,000 plus per month, they might pay $8 for receiving, $40 for inspection, and 90 cents a day for storage. So we try to, base the rates kind of on the volume as well.
It's interesting. So you're basically charging by the piece for the receiving, the inspection, and the storage, as opposed to, sometimes you'll get a shipment with half a trailer coming in. Sometimes you get one piece or 2 pieces coming in. And basically, typically what we've done is we've just had like a flat rate across the board per piece, and, for the receiving side and the storage side. But it doesn't always make sense if, like, there's a lamp that's this, or, something this big, and then you've got a giant sofa. You can't really, it doesn't make sense to charge $35 for each of those, or $55 for each of those. So so you essentially have a price sheet for all the different types of things, and you basically base it off of that.
But it also encourages them to ship you everything, right? Because they are going to get a lower rate for accessories, and they can send you the sheets and the blankets and the towels and all that stuff because you have a lower rate for it. If you're flat rating it, you kind of got to base that flat rate on the bigger pieces that take longer. So they just stop shipping you the small stuff. I would rather them ship us everything because it helps with our efficiency.
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, if you get a call from a designer and your salesperson answers, they're used to quoting moves. But if you have all of these rates broken down into a sheet, you could basically say, yeah, absolutely, I'll send you over our rate sheet, and basically you can go forward. Is that kind of how you're handling it? Or were you meeting with these people and sitting them down and going through it with them?
You would be surprised. Once you're involved with this type of work, how often you will just get a random designer call up and say, hey, I started shipping some pieces to you. I need to set up my account. they haven't even seen the rates. I mean, I can't even count the number of times that that's happened over the years. Like, they were referred to us, they're in another state, but they know a designer who uses us here. So I don't know if that designer, talked them through the rates and how everything works, but by and large, they wouldn't even call. They would send an email saying, "Hey, I've shipped some pieces to you. I need to get my account set up." And basically from there, we would send them over, a PDF or a spreadsheet with the rates. And at the same time, we'd send over like terms of service, a credit card on file, authorization form. We would have a link to a video that kind of walked them through our technology as far as them having their own portal where they'll see their shipments and their inspections, and they can request a delivery. But that's all we would do. There was not a lot of back and forth about rates. Now, with local accounts, you may get to that point where they want to talk about rates before they sign up and stuff. But by and large, they want the service, and what they are willing to pay for is the certainty, right? And I think someone at the retreat was talking about this specifically, and that's what customers want to buy from you, is the certainty that this thing is going to work, and I'm not going to have problems, because designers don't handle problems well, right?
Yeah.
So what they want to buy is the certainty that I'm not going to have them.
Yeah, no, I've noticed that, it depends on the designer, but some of them can be fun to work with for sure, because they have high expectations. They work with high end clientele, and they expect high level of service. Well, this has been fascinating, very helpful, and I definitely want to continue the conversation. But I do want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your newest venture on the software side, because you kind of hinted at it earlier in the conversation about how that was a big differentiator over a lot of the existing delivery accounts and other people who might be working with designers. That just helps streamline the entire thing. I'm sure it helps with profits, and it helps with communication and coordination and transparency. But tell me a little bit about, like, what, since you've sold Too Big for My Car, tell me what this newest venture is with the software that you're working
with. So for about the last 4 years, with Too Big for My Car, I was developing software because there wasn't really anything for the industry specific to receiving and inspections and communicating the receiving and the inspections and the pictures, and being able to charge for those things and charge for the storage. I mean, there's 10,000 different warehouse management software platforms out there, but they're not built for this. They're not built to have one-off pieces. They're built for, I'm going to buy 10,000 of this thing, and I'm going to enter 10,000 of them in the software, and then I'm going to store them. For us, it's always unique pieces, and we got to charge for receiving and inspection and storage, and we have to communicate that stuff. And we got to the point where we had 4 and 5 people in the business that all they did was manual processes and procedures with regard to communicating a shipment arrived and manually sending that to the client, and the photos and manually sending that to the client, and putting pieces in spreadsheets and manually having to calculate what we're going to charge for receiving and inspection and storage. And it was all so complicated that we were actually only billing our clients once a month because it just took forever. And so when we started building out our own software, we built the warehouse management and the account portals, so their own CRM and the dispatch and routing, and we built this automated scheduling process so that we didn't have to manually call customers to schedule a delivery and collect a payment and ask them if they wanted us to haul away their old pieces. The software could do all of that. So we automated about $250,000 a year in payroll costs just by doing this. And it took us 2.5 years to build it. We were using it ourselves for about a year and a half, and then we started licensing it to other companies about a year ago. We probably have 13 companies, I want to say, right now that are up and running on the software. But it's built for the exact workflow with furniture stores, interior designers, 3PLs, home stagers, the cabinets, all of that type of work, and really made the business really efficient. We were, like I said, in 2025, we were close to 3.5 million in sales, but we only had 4 overhead positions. So those are positions that didn't generate revenue from anything that they did. We had an operations manager, a sales and customer service manager, a dispatcher, and a remote admin. And that was it. Everybody else generated sales through receiving fees, inspection fees, and then obviously on the trucks. So it's pretty rare to see any kind of a moving or delivery operation at that volume with that few overhead positions. So the business was super efficient. The kind of efficiency you usually just don't see. So like I said, for the last year, I still own the business. Didn't sell it till April of this year, but about a year ago, we started licensing the software. I do a lot of work with moving companies that are interested in getting into this kind of work, helping them establish, best practices and process and procedure and rate structure, whether or not they want to be on the software or they're ready for software or they have enough volume to really make it work. I probably spend 200 hours a year just working with moving companies that are just interested in learning more about it. And maybe they have some volume in it, maybe they don't, maybe they want to get into it, but on a long enough timeline, they'll need a way to manage that side of the business. And that's where the TV Dispatch Pro software comes in. But like I said, I talk to moving companies all the time that aren't, don't have the volume for that yet, or are just wanting to learn about it. I think probably in the fall, we'll end up doing some webinars to help people understand the business, understand how to get into it, best practices and such. I think at the end of the day, we're put on this planet to serve, right? Whether, to serve and to help. And when I started the furniture delivery business, there was nobody to help me. Like there was no moving company owners group. There was, nowhere for me to go to ask a question about how to do it, best practices. So that's one thing I really like about the moving business is that you guys have it dialed in. I mean, there is no excuse not to run a successful moving company. There's just so many resources available from, the Tighten Up and the Facebook groups. There's no excuse, right? If you don't succeed in this business, it's because you didn't want to.
I love it. I love it, Wally. That is exactly my philosophy on all of it as well. I mean, the resources that are out there these days are just vast compared to when I started about 15 years ago. And I mean, had I had access to everything that's out there and known what I know today when I first started off, who knows where things would be, but no better time to start than now. And for anybody who's interested in checking out TV Dispatch Pro, if you're looking to get in to this kind of work, which I'm super interested in, I'd love to explore the software a little bit more as we try to grow our warehouse and our storage and our receiving accounts and our, maybe deliveries again. Maybe we'll revisit that now that we have a little bit more infrastructure than we did the first time around. And certainly, something my franchisees can look into as well in their markets. Because I mean, that consistent revenue throughout the off season, I mean, storage is also a big piece of that. And so, these deliveries, it's piqued my interest. So I would definitely love to continue this conversation. I still have so many more things I want to talk about, but for the sake of time, we do have to jump off here. But if anybody wants to get in touch with you, Wally, to demo your TV Dispatch Pro software or just to connect and get advice or consultations on how they can succeed in this line of business in the moving space, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, the Facebook group is a great way. Facebook in general, the LinkedIn, I'm easy to find on both of those. So, and I'm happy to help with whatever someone needs, whether they're, just thinking about getting into this kind of work and want to talk through it, or they are involved in it a little bit, but need some help with process, procedure, the rate structures to really kind of set themselves up to be successful with it. That's what I'm here for. If it leads to software, it leads there, but doesn't need to.
I love it. That's a true servant's mindset and good servant leadership there. And I really appreciate the value that you brought not only to this conversation, but to the Moving Titans, and definitely looking forward to staying in touch and would love to explore that software some more too. So thank you for coming on. This has been an awesome episode.
Sounds great. I love it. I appreciate it. It's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for joining us today with Wally Pelett of on the Grow Your Moving Company podcast with now TB Dispatch Pro, formerly TooBigForMyCar.com, his company that started it all. And until next time, we'll see y'all later and continue to tighten up. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Grow Your Moving Company podcast. If you'd like to learn more about any of the sponsors listed on this show, want to apply for the next Moving Titan retreat, or interested in owning or working for Two College Brothers franchise, drop me a line at wade@twocollegebrothers.com. Moving out. Have a great day.